They say a city forgets your face after 7 seconds. That's about how long it took for the girl in the yellow raincoat to step off the rubber tiles, touch the chain-link fence with her palm, and vanish from our courtyard like the word you can't catch once it leaves your mouth. It was a Friday, late afternoon, warm but overcast, everything the color of a sidewalk after a sprinkler. The courtyard behind my apartment complex smelled like cut grass and laundry vent. Someone was grilling in the alley, sweet, peppery smoke, and the swing chains squeaked in a rhythm everyone in the building knew without admitting it. Parents scrolled phones. Teenagers orbited in threes. I stood by the communal mailbox with 2 flyers in my hand and the bright idea that I might finally put up a notice for my tutoring sessions. Her name was Tessa. I learned that later. In the moment, she was just yellow, a tiny beacon with damp bangs and a bandaged star on one knee. She made a game of jumping from one blue square to another without touching the red. She kept missing, then laughing, then trying again as if failure were an elastic she could snap against her wrist for fun. A delivery truck rumbled down the back lane, brake pads whining. A dog barked twice and then remembered itself. The wind flipped my flyers into my face. I caught them, paper against lipstick, and when I looked back, the yellow was gone. Not off to the slide, not under the picnic table, not behind her mother who had been talking to another woman near the sandbox, her hand making circles in the air like she was drawing the shape of the week. The fence ran the length of the yard with a single gate that stuck unless you jimmied it up and out. It wasn't open. No one screamed. No one ran. There was just a widening silence, the kind that makes you aware of your own breathing. Mine smelled like coffee I shouldn't have had at 4 p.m., and the bright, stupid ordinariness of everything that had not changed. "Have you seen my daughter?" the mother asked, voice already nowhere near ordinary. Someone said, "She was just..." Someone else said, "I looked away for a second," and I heard myself say, "I saw her by the fence." By the fence, and then not anywhere at all. What do you call it when a whole courtyard watches and still can't swear to the same 7 seconds? My name is Mara. I'm 33, tutor English out of my 1-bedroom, and own 4 plants that forgive me everything. I moved to Portland after a divorce that split my life into before and the long after, where you try to pronounce your own name without thinking of the echo. I tell myself I'm good at noticing details. Comma splices, the exact note of somebody's laugh, when rain is about to fall because the air turns metallic and cool behind your teeth. Our building is a 70s U-shape with a courtyard at the center. If you stand on the 3rd floor walkway and lean just enough to set off your therapist's alarm, you can see all the tiny lives stacked like shoeboxes. Bicycles with toddler seats, basil plants, a string of globe lights that always lose 2 bulbs at once. On weekends, the courtyard belongs to kids and barbecues. On weeknights, to smokers who pretend what ash won't find the same lungs later. I like the sound of it. Tinny laughter, the dull thwack of a soccer ball against wood, the clack of a gate latch that never quite catches. 2 months before Tessa disappeared, I started tutoring a teenager named Ezra from 2B, which is how I learned the rhythms of this place. His mother, Danny, worked double shifts at the hospital and left chalk messages on their door to remind him, "Milk, trash, text me." He joked without moving his face. He loved sci-fi, hated semicolons. He talked about the little kids the way people talk about weather, around it. "They scream at frequencies dogs can hear," he said. "It's fine, they're not our problem." I came to like those frequencies, maybe because I had never needed to learn them in my own life. My husband, Liam, and I tried for 2 years and ended up with a file folder thick with appointment cards, and a silence between us I still know by weight. He left kindly. That's the worst kind. He said I made our house into a library where he couldn't cough. I said he made every meal into a test with a right answer he wouldn't share. Here, I let sound happen around me. I left my windows cracked, took notes on my students at the kitchen table, and watered the forgiving plants while people played outside. Tessa had been a new constant, a bright bug collecting bark chips and declaring them treasures with the seriousness children reserve for anything that fits in a pocket. Her mother, Ava, was the type of woman who remembered her neighbors' birthdays and her own boundaries. She wore a key on a carabiner clipped to her belt like a promise she intended to keep. I had met them twice. Once at the mailboxes, where Tessa showed me her bandage star and I complimented its bravery. Once in the laundry room where Ava folded their t-shirts with ballet math. Half again, stack, while Tessa sang a song about a cat who took the bus. They looked like the photograph that comes with picture frames, a life generic enough to pass as ideal. And then there were all the other faces of the courtyard. Mr. Nji, who fed crows peanuts like family, the teenage duo who shared a skateboard and probably a vape, the woman who listened to true crime podcasts out loud because headphones made her ears itch, the landlord's nephew who promised to fix the gate this week until the calendar got bored and moved on. An ordinary cast, if you like your theater civic. I tell you this because I am not an outsider who wandered into a tragedy and stayed for the spectacle. I am a neighbor with a watering can. I am a tutor who knows which mailbox jams. I am a person who has been losing small things for years. Keys, earrings, whole futures, and has learned how to tell the difference between misplacing and vanishing. The afternoon Tessa went missing, I was rehearsing my return to the world. I held 2 flyers for my tutoring service and considered the corkboard by the mailbox, which was always swallowing announcements whole and pinning their bones. On my way down the stairs, I passed Ezra, who nodded like we both had been assigned this hallway and were doing our best with it. His headphones were on, I could hear the tinny beat anyway. Later, people would ask me what I saw, and I would tell them the truth I have, which is full of holes, like any net you try to hold water with. I saw yellow. I saw a small hand on chain link. I saw a delivery truck and heard a dog and tasted old coffee and told myself I would put my flyers up later because my hands were sweating and no one hires a tutor whose paper curl. I did not see a man or a woman lead Tessa away. I did not see the gate open. I did not see a car door. I did not see anything that allows you to stop a story at a step and say, here, this one. This was the wrong turn. What I saw was a courtyard that swallowed its 7 seconds and refused to cough them back up. If you stand at a window and watch your neighbors, how do you know which details will matter when someone asks you to swear?
Police cars don't sound like TV when they pull into your life. They thrum. They negotiate the turn at the alley with sighs and the slap of gravel under tires. The courtyard turned from weekend to witness in the space it takes to set cones. Ava's voice had gone flat, like paper pulled too tight on a drum. "Tessa," she called, competent and terrifying, the way a nurse says, "We're doing this now." She was already dialing 911 when the rest of us were still looking under benches like people who believed the right angle would conjure a child. The first officer to arrive was young enough to look like someone's kid. She asked the mother's name. She wrote it down and repeated it to keep the air occupied. "Ava, I need a description." The words fell into a notebook that looked too small for this. "Yellow raincoat, cloud print, bandage on the right knee, pink sneakers, one lace shorter than the other, brown hair, chin length, bangs that keep getting in her eyes." The young officer looked at me like a radio catching a good station. "Age?" she asked Ava. 5. She's 5. The number looked wrong in her mouth, like an eraser where a tooth should be. More uniforms. The gate was examined with its own tiny scandal of attention. A unit took the alley. Someone took statements near the picnic table under a tree that drops those spiky balls in spring. The ball rolled off the table. Mr. Eng put it back without thinking, and then froze, as if he had just moved evidence in the museum. He whispered sorry to no one. When it was my turn, My mouth decided to tell the story in crisp present tense, as if grammar could control time. She jumps from blue to blue and touches the fence. A truck goes by, my flyers blow, I look away, I look back, she is gone. Did the truck stop? The officer asked. I don't think so. License? I didn't look. Anyone near the fence? I didn't see. Cameras? She said it like a lifeline thrown. We all looked up at once, like a flock, toward the linty black dome a landlord installs and then forgets to wire. The nephew blushed, or maybe he was born that way. It's, a dummy, he said. They searched the dumpster with the slow carefulness of people who do not want to find what the job requires. They knocked on doors. They called for canine, and the dog arrived with a seriousness that made us want to behave. The air smelled like wet fur and grass and panic. By dusk, our courtyard had been taped into a theory. The officers widened the circle, checking the street, the bus stop, the nearby cafe with the mural of an octopus hugging a latte. Ava gave them a recent photo from her phone, Tessa on the stoop, scowling into the sun, a star bandage already proudly in place. The officer printed copies on a portable machine that made a hot, chemical smell, and I watched the girl's face become paper. I went upstairs once to plug in my phone and cry without an audience, and that's when I noticed the flyers still in my hand. I smoothed them on the counter and laughed, a horrible sound, because one of them had a smudge in the corner the exact size and shape of a small handprint. I had no idea when it got there. I pressed my own fingers over it. My skin smelled like soap and metal. At 9, the courtyard lights clicked on. They are no good for anything human. Too dim for reading, too bright for stars. The officers asked who had been there the whole time. People raised hands or didn't. Stories shifted the way stories do once the sun goes and you start to doubt your own eyes. A teenager swore she saw a woman in a green hoodie by the fence. A man insisted the gate had been ajar. Someone mentioned a white van because there is always a white van. And we all agreed that the delivery truck had been brown. I went to Ava and offered water like I was in a play. She took it because people do. Her hands were shaking like electricity. I looked away for 1 minute, she said, the way people confess crimes that aren't. 1 minute, I said without meaning to. That's all it takes to forget a face. She looked at me like I had said something sane. Across the courtyard, the canine barked once, short, toward the alley. Everyone turned. The dog sniffed the fence post and then sat down, which meant nothing I could live with. At midnight, they asked us to go inside, but to listen for knocks. I lay on my bed with my shoes on, facing the fan ceiling, and let my phone buzz news alerts into the dark like a nervous insect. Missing child, last seen. The words fell into a hole I could not see the bottom of. If you tell your story once and it doesn't bring back the girl, how many times can you tell it before it belongs to someone else? Mourning has its own cruelty. The courtyard looked like the aftermath of a party nobody meant to have. Cones, tape, a scattering of plastic cups someone swore weren't theirs. My plants on the rail had drunk rain in the night, their leaves still slick, the way small living things are shameless about accepting water. The police set up a table with coffee that tasted like decisions, and a clipboards that made strangers official. Volunteers came from nowhere like ants. A woman with a vest labeled Search handed me a stack of flyers with Tess's face multiplied into a paper army. I swallowed and said yes to routes. The cafe, the bus stop, the grocery store with a sticky floor that smells like lettuce and sugar. People took them with the careful politeness grief demands. I'll keep an eye out, the barista said, and then looked at the photo again, as if the child could return while his espresso poured. Ava had moved from the courtyard to her couch, but not really moved at all. She sat with a blanket over her knees and the news on mute, a parade of B-roll, swing chains, the fence, the gate latch auditioning for blame. Every now and then she answered a call and said her name like a password. I stood in her kitchen and made tea because that is what I do when my hands need tasks. The kettle whistled like a bad idea. People started remembering things. The women with the itchy ears claimed a man had been lingering by the recycling bins all week. Mr. Nee thought he saw a hat over the fence when he walked his crows. We didn't correct his pronouns. A child said she saw Tessa float up like a balloon, and her mother shushed her with a sugar cookie. The problem with a courtyard is that it's an eye that sees too much and agrees on nothing. Detective Carver introduced himself near the mailboxes. He was the kind of tired that reads as competence. He asked me to walk him through my vantage point again. I showed him the mailbox, the chain link, the alley angle where the truck had been not stopping. He squinted into the middle distance like his eyes had their own job. Sometimes the simplest route is the one we overlook because it feels insulting, he said. Could she have crawled under the play structure? She would have laughed. She narrates her life. He nodded. Kids do. I wanted to be helpful. That's my disease. I started keeping a list in a tiny spiral notebook. License plates that parked too long by the alley, delivery schedules, the faces I didn't recognize in a place where I thought I knew all the extras. Turns out the city has an endless supply. I wrote down green hoodie with a question mark and circled bait every time the nephew said he'd fix it and then didn't. By afternoon, the courtyard had the stunned quiet of a theater between shows. I made a loop around the block to pretend I had errands. On the second loop, a woman in a mail carrier uniform, hair in a tight bun, jaw tight too, stopped me. "You from there?" she asked, jerking her chin toward our gate. "Yes." "I saw the kid. Yesterday." She looked at my face to measure how much to give. She was playing with those big chalks, drew a sun with too many rays, little perfectionist. A man asked her about her picture, tall, beard, maybe mid-30s. He said he liked sunshine. Then her mom called and she went. He walked away towards 6th. Could be nothing. It was almost certainly nothing, which is what makes something grow teeth in your head. I told Carver. He wrote it down like a bead on a string. He said, "We'll pull 6th. Cameras. The city is lousy with them, mostly pointed at corners where nothing happens. We're told they remember what we don't. I watched a team in plain clothes go shop to shop asking for footage, and I wanted to hug every board manager who said yes without performing policy. The bakery, 2 blocks down, produced video of a man with a beard at 3:12 p.m., buying a single cookie and a bottle of water and touching every lid before choosing one like a game. Could be him. Could be everyone. By sundown, rumor had filled the spaces facts refused. A neighbor whispered that Ava's ex had custody beef. Someone else muttered about a registered offender 3 streets over, even though the map had been checked and rechecked like a superstition. I watched Avi, the guy from 3A who teaches improv and believes in open mics the way some people believe in saints, argue with a newcomer who demanded to search Ava's apartment, as if grief were a closet you could tidily organize. I went home and made the mistake of Googling how many minutes until a missing child is found. The answers were a chorus of statistics dressed as comfort. Early is good, later is worse. You already knew that. I closed my laptop and stared at the plant I always forget the name of. It was doing what it always does, panicking quietly and then deciding to live anyway. At 11, there was a knock. I looked through the peephole and saw Ezra, hoodie up, eyes flicking like a mouse. He held up a plastic bag with the deli logo curled like a smile. He said, "Mom says you haven't eaten." "I have, sort of." I stepped aside. He came in, shoes off without asking, and put the bag on my counter like we were acting normal. The sandwich tasted like salt and cardboard, which is to say, it did its job. He leaned on the sink and stared at my flyers, still unpinned. He said, "They asked me what I saw. I told them I was doing calc and listening to music. They asked what song. I said I don't remember. They wrote it down like a crime." "It isn't," I said. He nodded too fast. "I know." He didn't, and neither did I. He left the bag and a silence behind, and I was grateful for both because they made the next breath possible. Outside, sirens traveled like weather. I pressed my palm to the glass. It was cold the way glass always is, even in summer, even when a child you barely know has turned your courtyard into a map only grief can read. When every face is a witness and none of them agree, what's left to trust besides the shape of your own fear?
Day 3, a new smell arrived. Bleach. The dumpster had been hosed. The alley had been scalded clean. It made everyone smell like a hospital corridor in winter. Sterile, humming. Detective Carver knocked at 9 with his notebook and a tilt to his head like the question was trying to ask him first. "We found something on a backyard camera 2 houses down," he said. "A figure by the fence line around the time you described. Hood up." They pause. Then, they don't climb. They flatten, like they're lying down. Crawling? Maybe. Or tampering. He led me to the neighbor's laptop because the neighbor works nights and had offered their footage like a tithe. The screen showed our chain link fence from the outside, a sliver through box hedges. At the lower right, a shape moved, too low, too careful. A hand, not a child's, too big, reached under the bottom rung and tugged. The chain link flexed. There was a small black shape in the hand, something like a tool. And then the hand let go. The fence settled. The shape crawled away. My mouth went dry. I said, "They made a gap, a crawl space." Carver nodded. "We checked. There's a spot where the chain link had been unhooked from the post. It's rehooked now." "Who fixes a kidnapping?" I heard myself say, and my voice sounded like a pan clanging. "Someone who wants 7 seconds to stay a rumor," he said. He asked me to walk the alley with him. The ground smelled like last week's rain and this morning's chemical correction. We stopped at the fence line where the grass struggled. Up close, I could see the faint bright of metal where the hooks were newer. I pressed my finger to the link and felt a grit that could have been rust, could have been soil, could have been idea. "Could a 5-year-old crawl under here?" I asked. "Easily, if invited." I tasted copper again. The thought that startled me wasn't horror, it was recognition. Children turn small to make worlds bigger. I had done it under dining chairs, behind curtains, in the narrow space between beds and walls. I had learned to shrink to fit the silence my marriage asked for. It's a skill you can repurpose against yourself. The twist was not the gap. The twist was who knew to look for it. That afternoon, a post appeared on our building's forum. Reminder, please fix the loose sections of fence. Kids could squeeze through. It was signed by property management and timed earlier, the morning before the disappearance. The first line was administrative. The second line, a question. Who last serviced the chain link? Ava replied immediately. "We asked for it months ago. No one came." The landlord's nephew responded with a sheepish emoji and a sentence that made the courtyard collectively swear. I tightened it yesterday morning. Yesterday morning. Carver stood at the gate with the nephew and a patience I envied. He asked what he'd used. The nephew, cheeks blotchy, held up a multi-tool and the expression of a person who has just realized he has been cast as the wrong role. He said, "Just hook the thing back. Looked loose." "Did you see anyone?" Carver asked. "No, I mean, maybe someone by the hedge. I had my headphones in." "What were you listening to?" Carver asked, and I thought of Ezra deciding music could be a crime. "Podcast. Does it matter?" "Not for the reason you think," Carver said. I took a photo of the fence hooks because that's how I make memory obey me sometimes. The shine of new metal looked obscene, like a tooth crown on a baby. I emailed the photo to myself with the subject line, entry, and stared at that word until it meant nothing and everything. By evening, the story had a new spine. A crawl space created, a crawl space repaired. Who repaired it and why became our new prayer. I watched as neighbors chose sides without knowing there were teams. Some decided the nephew was an idiot but not a villain. Some decided he was both.
Some decided we were all looking in the wrong direction out of habit. I went upstairs to call my mother, who lives in Fresno and thinks Oregon is just a green rumor. I tried to tell her about the fence. She told me about the price of eggs. We both did our best. Then I sat on the edge of my tub and looked at the grout lines and thought about how much of a life is built on what you decide to maintain. At 11, a new rumor. The woman in the green hoodie had a name. Someone thought she was staying with friends in 4C. Someone else said she worked at the cafe. Someone else said she was a ghost people invented to have something to aim at besides the mirror. I lay down and told my ceiling the truth. I had seen a yellow raincoat. I had watched 7 seconds go unclaimed. I had taken a photo of a fence a man fixed out of stupidity or malice, or both. I knew none of it put a child back where a mother could reach her. If the first twist is that the exit was there all along, what trick are we missing that will make the courtyard give up its ghost?
Escalation in real life is quieter than the word suggests. It looks like more flyers and fewer people willing to take them. It smells like rain you pretend won't fall because the box of copies is on the table and you promised yourself you'd make it to the next block. It sounds like your own voice saying, "Have you seen?" until the grammar detaches and you hear only the shape of plea. Day 5, the news trucks arrived. They made the street look like a small parade had taken a wrong turn. Anchors stood by the fence and spoke at lenses with open faces. And for the first time, I realized how much teeth have to do with trust. Ava stood apart from it, face paper white in the camera lights, and said the sentence all mothers in her place say because it's a spell and a dare. "Tessa, if you can hear me, we're right here." The building divided itself into helpers and commentators. The helpers brought snacks and babysat in printed maps. The commentators crouched around theories the way kids sit around a bug and dare it to do something. A man with a ponytail explained to me that statistically, it's always the parents. I said statistically he should stop talking. He smiled, like I had flirted. The police widened their circle. They added a picture of a bearded man in a green hoodie taken from a camera near the bus stop. It was useless, the kind of photo where the face is a coin rubbed flat, but it gave everyone's eyes a chair to sit in. The cafe barista said he'd seen the guy once, maybe? Mr. Ang swore he hadn't. Ezra said, "Could be me if I stop shaving," and tried to laugh at his own joke, but it broke in his throat. Ava's mother arrived from Salem, fierce and small, and began folding the courtyard into a command center. She had a clipboard. She made the teenagers run errands and the adults drink water. She reminded everyone to put on sunscreen, even though the cloud cover acted like the state's ceiling. Ava watched her mother with the soft, blank expression you get when love has to wear armor. I dreamed about fences. In one, I tried to crawl under and my hips stuck, and I woke to the cheap apartment panic that you will die and someone you don't like will find your socks. In another, the chain link was made of words, and I kept unhooking maybe and replacing it with enough. On day 6, we got weather. The rain fell the way it falls here, a long conversation rather than a fight. It cleaned the alley and sharpened the smell of bark chips. Volunteers left when their shoulders soaked through. The canine worked anyway. I watched from my window and promised myself I would stay inside to teach my afternoon student, a kid who needed gerunds to stop wriggling. He canceled. "Sorry, family stuff." I emailed back 3 sentences about floodplains and syntax, because sometimes the only thing that calms me is a rule that still works when the rules that matter don't. That night at 2:04 a.m., my phone pinged with a photo, a shot of the courtyard from above, blurry but unmistakable, the swing set, the bench, the gate. The caption, "You missed something." The number was blocked. I felt cold in a way that wasn't temperature. I walked to the window and pulled the blind a fraction. The courtyard was empty except for the swing, which moved a single inch as if the air had a hand. I forwarded the text to Detective Carver with a note, "New message, unknown sender, 2:04 a.m." He responded at 2:05, which made me love him a little. "Don't reply, sit tight, forwarding to tech." Sit tight. I watched the clock turn 2:06, 2:07, 2:08, and counted my breaths in eighths, the way my therapist taught me when my marriage was ending and the room kept tilting for no visible reason. By 2:30, my body believed the bad again. Sleep came like a truce. The next afternoon, Carver knocked with a printout. He said, "The photo came from the building, from someone on the 3rd floor, East Wing." I said, "That's me." He said, "Different side." He asked me to walk the 3rd floor walkway with him. We did that strange, half-silent neighbor tour of doors I'd never had reason to notice. At 3E, a new doormat. Welcome, but not too much. At 3F, a dead plant and an ashtray because some people prefer the 70s. At 3G, a line of small shoes outside like a census. At 3H, the door I had never seen open. A new tenant who moved in last week, someone said. A night shift something. The pier hole felt huge and blind. Carver knocked. No answer. "Can you get me permission from management?" he asked. The nephew materialized like a bad decision. "I can let you in," he said, eager to be useful. Inside 3H, the air smelled like cardboard and no one. There were boxes, a mattress on the floor, and a single chair aimed at the window like someone had been trying to memorize the courtyard by force. On the chair, a tripod. Next to it, a cheap camera with a long lens, the kind a birdwatcher buys when they're ready to be serious but not ready to be broke. Carver did not touch it. He didn't have to. The lens looked out like an eye bored of pretending to be glass. A printout lay on the floor under the chair. A photo of the courtyard, like the one sent to my phone, but marked with a circle near the fence and the word "flatten" in block letters. My stomach made a sound I have never made anywhere but a bathroom. "Who's on the lease?" Carver asked. The nephew swallowed. "It's a guy named T. Harrison." At the word Harrison, something small clicked. Ezra's calc book, the return address on a package he'd signed for last week. Harrison, Unit 3H. He'd said, "They deliver to the wrong door and I do penance." My face must have moved. Carver saw it. "What?" he asked. "Maybe nothing," I said. Ezra mentioned mail. I felt like I had just nominated a student for detention based on handwriting. He nodded, wrote it down the way he writes everything down, and kept moving through the room with his hands in his pockets like refusal. He took a picture of the tripod. He looked at the closet without opening it. He found a sock under the chair. He said, "People always leave socks. It's a human rule." He asked the nephew for the security footage from the 3rd floor camera, and the nephew started explaining about dummies again until the detective raised one eyebrow in a way that made the kid go get the real file he probably should have led with. We stood on the walkway outside 3H while Carver scrolled. There we were at 1:47 a.m., 2 nights back. A figure in a hoodie, green, the camera decided, walking toward 3H, with a pizza box. They knocked and went in. At 2:03, the same figure stepped back out, crossed to the rail, and lifted the camera on the tripod like a person adjusting a telescope. At 2:04, a small flash like the blink of a lazy star. At 2:05, the figure texted with their head down, thumb working. At 2:06, they went back inside. "Delivery?" I asked. Carver zoomed. The pizza logo was a cartoon sun wearing sunglasses. I had seen it in the alley 100 times. He said, "We'll ask. In the meantime, try not to be alone." I said, "Too late," but softly because he was trying to be human. That evening, Ezra knocked again. He did not bring food this time.
He brought a shadow, his own, a lengthened version in my doorway attached to a kid pretending not to be scared. They asked me about Harrison, he said. I told them I don't know him. I don't. He just gets packages. He's never home. Is this about Tessa? You'll tell me if I should be concerned. I said, you should be human, which you already are. It wasn't an answer. It was the only thing I had. He nodded like he wanted to deserve something. His hoodie smelled like rain. He left and I locked the door, and I hated the sound that bolt made because it told the room there was something to keep out. When escalation looks like a chair by a window and a camera on a tripod, how do you stop the part of your brain that loves patterns from drawing a picture you can't live inside? On day 7, Carver called me to the station. Just a room with a table and a plant trying its best, the way official rooms always are. He said, we're at a decision point. We can go public with Harrison, ask for tips, show the photo from the walkway, or we can stay quiet and keep the pressure on him privately. Public makes him run. Private might make him careless. Which risk do you want? He said, you, because in a building without consensus, I had become a kind of proxy for the Courtyard, the helpful disease volunteer. I should have deferred to wisdom. Instead, I chose like it was my house and the smoke alarm had lost its battery. Private, I said. Don't release it yet. Why? Because this has already become a story people want to own. Give them a new face and they'll stop looking at the fence. He watched my mouth as I made that argument, then nodded once. Okay. On my way home, I stopped by the cafe with the octopus mural. The barista, Lena, wiped the counter as if it were at fault. You look like a person who needs something hot, she said, and poured without asking, which is love in a ceramic cup. Did you see the Sun Pizza delivery late night? I asked. She thought. We stopped taking orders at 11. Drivers clock out by midnight. After that, you're on your own with the freezer and a dream. She smiled like she wanted me to have one thing that was simple. Thank you, I said, and meant it. Back in the courtyard, the helpers were thinning. Ezra sat on the bench with his calc book unopened, hood up even though it wasn't cold. I sat next to him, an adult pretending to be useful. You chose private, he said. News travels here like heat. Yes. He nodded. I would have chosen public. He glanced sideways, daring me to flinch. Private feels like sitting on your hands. It's also the only way to feel your own pulse, I said. He almost smiled. You say things like teachers in movies. I wear the shoes too. We watched an officer walk the fence line with a flashlight even though it was day. The beam looked ridiculous, a prop without purpose. I felt a flash of rage at the fence itself, at the audacity of objects to sit there pretending to be neutral. You know how I used to memorize where the creeks were in my dad's house so I could sneak out without causing things? How old were you? 14? I'd step on the edge of the stair, where it's stronger. That's all this is, right? Someone learned where to step. Someone always does, I said. We sat until the afternoon decided to be evening. The chain on the swing gave a small squeal. Somewhere upstairs, a kettle went off and no one claimed it. I thought about what I had chosen, silence for now, and tried to forgive myself for the possibility that it was wrong. That night, the second text, a new photo, closer, an angle from behind the tinted window of the management office pointing straight at the fence corner where the hooks had shined. Not the gate, the caption read. The shadow. I looked. There, barely, where the hedge met the fence, the darkest triangle seemed too neat to be nature. I forwarded it to Carver. He replied within a minute. On my way. Do not go outside.
I stood anyway because my disease is also curiosity, and went to the window to look at the shadow until it resolved into what shadows always are, a trick of not light. Then something shifted. No, someone. A figure stood up from the low crouch they had been in, as if a person had been folded and was now unfolding. Green hoodie. I breathed in so hard it hurt. The figure slipped along the hedge line like a note skittering down a staff and disappeared toward the alley. I thought about running. I thought about yelling. Instead, I did what I always do. I named. Green hoodie, left-handed, moves like a person who knows their knees. It went into the notebook of my head. It didn't put a child back in a mother's arms. When the choice is between telling the city a face and letting a shadow think it's alone, which one keeps you from losing yourself too?
The unraveling came in pieces. First, the management office camera, one of the only working ones, gave us an hour of footage from that afternoon. A man in a green hoodie, yes, but also a cap, sunglasses, a scarf despite the mildness. Someone assembling anonymity by committee. He walked along the hedge like a person who had measured the distance, and the hedge didn't dare disagree. Second, the pizza place confirmed. No deliveries after midnight. The sunbox had been a prop. The logo on the walkway footage was a sticker, approximate, a decoy for a camera that would be checked later by a person like me who needs optics to be proof. Third, Carver's tech traced my 2:04 a.m. text to a prepaid phone that had pinged 3 towers in a line from our alley to the river. Disposable, then disposed. The city eats evidence like bread. And then the second twist. Harrison wasn't Harrison. The lease was real, the name was fake. The social good enough to pass a bored bank clerk. The namer across from 3H remembered a woman with perfect posture moving a box inside 2 days before Tessa vanished. Red lips, the neighbor said, as if describing lipstick could be testimony. Shoes, like knives. A woman. Our green hoodie was a man, unless the woman wore the hoodie sometimes and the man wore the hoodie sometimes, and the hoodie was the point. Our stories drifted like that, toward clothing we could agree on, away from faces we couldn't. Carver called smaller meetings now, in apartments with carpets that turned every footstep into a whisper. I sat on Ezra's mom's couch with a mug I did not deserve and watched him gnaw at the string on his hoodie while Carver asked the new questions that arrive after the old ones give up. Anyone notice a car that sat too long, came too often? Anyone see a dog that wasn't a building dog? Amazon package taken by someone who wasn't a uniform? Ezra said I saw a woman take a package, mid-sized, brown tape, off 3H last week. She wasn't a porch pirate. She had keys. She looked like she hated me for existing. Describe her, Carver said, pen poised like a metronome waiting for the first note. Ezra talked about posture and red lips, and a scarf knotted too precisely to be an afterthought. She could be a dance teacher, he said, or like a person who works at a museum and tells you not to touch. I thought about the 2:04 text, you missed something, and how generous a taunt is when it makes you feel part of the story. I hated whoever sent it for understanding me, and I hated myself for being understandable. 2 days later, while the city rehearsed its reign, I ran into Lena from the cafe at the bus stop. She held a to-go cup in each hand and said, "You look like information." I said, "I'm full of caffeine and failure." She joined the club. She glanced toward the river. "We had a woman yesterday, perfect posture, scarf, even though it's muggy, ask about renting our back room for a support group. She left a card." She held it up. Portland Circle of Anonymous Secrets, it read. A number, a logo that looked like a ring of chairs. My skin did a small electricity. It was 2 on the nose, which is sometimes exactly how people get away with things. Give it a name so obvious, it becomes invisible. Can I asked, and she handed me the card, because friendship here is convenience multiplied by crisis. I brought it to Carver. He smoothed it on the table with 2 fingers. He said, "We called. Numbers of voicemail. We left a message." He looked at me. "You shouldn't go." I looked back. We both knew I was already halfway there. At 6, I texted the number, as if I had something to confess. Interested in the group. Can I come? The reply arrived like a door left unlocked. Tonight, 8 p.m., back room, no phones. Bring a truth you're willing to share. I sat with the words long enough to feel ridiculous, and then brave, and then ridiculous again. Ezra knocked at 7:30. "You're going, aren't you?" he said, not a question. I said, "You're not." "I know." He crossed his arms in a way that made him look like a small fortress. "Don't die?" I said, "I'll bring a sandwich, because humor is the rubber hammer you hit your own knee with to make it kick." The back room at the cafe had a glass wall facing the alley and a door that never quite closed, which felt symbolic. 3 chairs arranged in a triangle, a plant that looked like it had been forgiven once and never forgot. At 8:03, she walked in. Perfect posture, red mouth, scarf knotted like a statement. She was mid-40s maybe, with hair that obeyed. She smiled in a way that offered you 2 choices, be charmed or be wrong. She said, "I'm Lydia, not doctor, not Ms., just Lydia, the way people introduce themselves at boot camps where you pay to feel your limits." "I'm Marshall," I said, because my mouth panicked and chose the wrong R. She laughed lightly. "First time? Is it that obvious?" "It always is." She set a notebook on the table, cardboard, perforated pages, eucalyptus scent rode the air like a memory rides a breath. "This is simple," she said. "You tell a truth, I tell a truth, we resist the urge to fix each other. The pot grows each time." "The pot?" "Metaphor, darling." "Or not." We sat. She asked me something banal. "What brought you here?" And I said the banality you say when you're trying to get someone to underestimate you. A story I can't stop telling myself. She smiled like I had hit one of the right notes. We traded lies dressed as truths and truths dressed as asides. I watched the way her hand moved when she wrote, tight, controlled, no flourishes. I watched the door. I heard the alley collect bottles and footsteps and laughter from people who save their living for night. Finally, she said, "You live nearby." "Does everyone?" "Everyone who matters." She smiled again. "What did you see the day of?" The air went still. I looked at the plant, because it's the only thing that doesn't lie here. I said, "I saw a fence. A chain link, a small hand, 7 seconds. Her eyes glittered like something shiny on a riverbed, but turns out not to be a coin. She said, "It's always the fence. People think gates are where things happen, but exits," she tapped her notebook, "are almost never official." It was a confession disguised as a philosophy. I wanted to stand. I wanted to throw my chair. I wanted to keep her talking until she unspooled on her own. "What's your truth?" I asked. She tilted her head. "I help people step through the spaces they can't see." "For a price," I said, too fast. "Aren't you a tutor?" she asked, and I flinched because she shouldn't have known that. Everyone charges for their expertise. She stood. "We're done." "Will there be another meeting?" I asked. She smiled in a way that made meeting feel old-fashioned. "There's always another." She left through the back. I sat until my breath remembered its job. Then I walked out into the alley and called Carver and told him, with my voice low, "Lydia. Perfect posture, red mouth, not Harrison, but she knows the fence." If the second twist is that the hoodie is a costume and the real trick is the person who wrote the script, what do you do when the playwright invites you to her next show? The arrest did not look like an ending. It looked like cardboard boxes, still sealed, leaving 3H. It looked like a green hoodie in an evidence bag. It looked like Lydia's scarf on a table while Carver read her the courtesy of her rights. She listened with her chin raised, like a dancer about to be lifted. They pulled traffic camera footage from 3 intersections and found a car circling the block at 3:10 p.m. the day Tessa vanished, registered to Arden Logistics LLC in Vancouver, Washington. A shell that led to another shell that led to a rental that led to Lydia's signature and a loop back to our alley. There was always an LLC under a stone if you know which stones are performative. The thing that nailed it wasn't the car. It wasn't the hoodie. It was a video from the cafe's back room. Yes, even though she'd asked for no phones. The camera that watches the espresso machine catches a sliver of that room in its convex mirror. On the night of our meeting, when she leaned forward to tap her notebook, her sleeve slid just enough to show a tattoo. 3 small triangles in a row. In the footage from the river trail 2 days later, a person in a green hoodie, cap, glasses, bent to tie a shoe. The sleeve wrote up, 3 small triangles. You don't get custom geometry twice in a week in the same zip code by accident. When Carver showed her the stills, she looked bored. "I'm a therapist," she said. "Groups use symbols." "You're not licensed," he said. "Is anyone, really?" she asked, which is the kind of line you say when you've decided the world is a stage for your cleverness. "Where is Tessa?" he asked, and his voice did not move. She folded her hands. "I help families find exits." Ava stood in the hallway because she insisted. Her mother stood beside her with a face that could turn strawberries into wine just by glaring. "Give me my child," Ava said quietly. Lydia held Ava's gaze for 3 seconds and then looked away, which is the only charity I'll grant her. She said, "You think you want answers. You want a version you can live with. What I want is the version where my daughter is alive." Lydia smiled, small. "Then you're luckier than most." There are moments you don't believe until you feel your own knees. The raid on a little house by the river, the back room smelling like lavender and lies, the sight of a child's raincoat folded in a drawer like an altar, the sound a mother makes when a door opens and a small person in socks runs into the space where arms have been pretending to be furniture. Tessa was alive. The house was a safe place in the way a trap thinks it is benevolent. She called it a respite for families in transition, which is a phrase that makes language want to quit. No evidence she'd been hurt beyond the theft of her days. Tessa blinked into fluorescent light and said hoarse, "I drew a sun," which made Ava laugh and cry at the same time because souls are stupid for symbols. She said, "I was going to visit a new yard. She made the fence go flat." She held up her hand and showed her how you press the metal in and then release. It sprang back. She taught me how to be small. Ava held her there in the hallway and said, "Thank you, to everyone and to no one and to the air." I stood against the wall and pressed my palm to the paint and realized I had been holding my breath for a week. My knees remembered gravity. I sat on the floor. They charged Lydia with custodial interference, kidnapping, about 6 flavors of fraud. Harrison, the fake tenant, turned out to be a grad school friend she'd paid in cash to sign leases and move boxes. The green hoodie man was a freelance cameraman she hired through a gig app to document a social experiment on trust. He told the police he thought he was filming art. Maybe he was, if you count art that eats people. What was the point? Ezra asked me later, when the courtyard had turned back into itself and didn't know how to behave. I said, "Control. Attention. Money," he added. "Sure. and the feeling you get when you can make a fence do what you want. He nodded like we had named a new planet. He looked at Tessa's chalk sun, still bright on the rubber tiles despite the rain, and then at me. We're going to keep our eyes open, right? Yes, but also sleep. Tessa went back upstairs with her mother. People clapped like an audience that can't help it. The courtyard exhaled. A crow on the lamppost cawed as if it had been keeping score. Mr. Ang saluted it with a peanut. I went inside and finally pinned my flyers to the corkboard by the mailboxes. My hands didn't sweat. The caper lay flat. The thumbtack clicked with a sound I will think of when I need to remember what small victories sound like. When the climax arrives and it looks like a door opening, how do you walk back into your life without checking every fence for the rest of your days?
There's a quiet that comes after sirens that the city doesn't advertise. It smells like wet concrete and fried onions from the cart that returns as if nothing happened. It feels like the muscles in your shoulders remembering they were meant to hold up only you. Tessa went to her grandmother's for a week and came back with a haircut that made her bangs behave. She painted a sun on the courtyard wall during the Saturday potluck, and the landlord didn't make her stop, because sometimes decency sneaks up on people. Ava took down the flyers and put up a thank you note in her tidy hand. For every person who looked, for every person who kept looking. People left flowers under it for 3 days, then one, then none. Because life insists on resuming. Lydia pled not guilty. Her lawyer used words like therapeutic intervention and radical community care. Carver rolled his eyes so hard you could hear it. The green-hoodied cameraman took a plea on a lesser charge and gave up every email he had. Harrison moved to Albuquerque and started a podcast about ethics that accidentally made me laugh out loud once on the bus. Defense got replaced. Not fixed, replaced. The new chain link made a cleaner, meaner sound when you plucked it. The gate latch finally caught, like a handshake that knows its job. The nephew learned to blush less and answer customers more. The landlord installed 2 real cameras and a sign about surveillance that made some people angry and most people calmer. You choose your illusions. Ezra passed calculus. He texted me THX and I pretended not to want vowels. He started skateboarding again, which made Danny complain, and then grin. We still sit sometimes and talk as if you can reason with fear when it remembers to knock. I kept my notebook for a while. License plates, schedules, the faces I didn't recognize. After a month, I stopped writing in it. I did not throw it away. It lives in my drawer like a fire extinguisher. Comforting for existing, dangerous if it becomes a hobby. Some nights, late, I wake and listen for the swing to squeak. It does once, because air is a thing. I make tea and stand by the window and press my palm to the glass for a second, and let the cold remind me that boundaries are not enemies. I stare at the fence, and then, deliberately, I stare away. Ava started a parents group with a boring name and a fierce purpose. No pot, no mirrors. They meet in the cafe where the plant thrives now. Lena put a bell on the door that rings like an ordinary day. Sometimes Ava waves me in and I sit for 5 minutes and say nothing, because not all witnesses have to speak forever. Once, Tessa knocked on my door. Serious face, backpack on. She said, "You left this at the mailbox," holding up one of my old flyers, bent at the corner. She looked up at me like a person who trusts the muscle memory of her own house again. "You should put it back so people know you're good." I said, "Maybe I will." "Maybe is not yes," she replied.
a sentence she must have learned from a woman with a key on a carabiner. "Okay," I said. "Yes." And I did. Resolution is sometimes just letting your courtyard be a courtyard again, and deciding you deserve to teach people where commas go without also being in charge of saving them.
Here is what I will tell you if you ask, and you will. People always do when something awful almost ends well. I didn't solve anything alone. I witnessed, I wrote down. I said the right nouns to the right detective at the right time, and even then the river of luck had to flow our way. That doesn't make me less proud. It just makes me honest about the size of my hands. I learned this, too. Exits rarely look like gates. They look like gaps we pretend aren't there because the maintenance request keeps getting ignored, or because the person who made the gap is so tidy you want to trust her. They look like 7 seconds multiplied by all the ways a city doesn't keep track of its own face. I still love details. I still notice the way eucalyptus hand soap clings to air and the exact pitch of a swing chain in damp weather. But I have added something gentler to the list of what I keep. Permission not to catalog every risk. Permission to live in a building where kids scream at dog frequencies and old men feed crows and teenagers pretend they invented Foucault, and mothers lean against fence posts and look at their daughters like the sun is a thing in a small jacket. People will ask me if the courtyard is safe now. I will say, safe enough to choose to stay. That's all I have ever wanted from any noun. And when I forget, there's a chalk sen on the wall bright enough to remind me.
I still check the latch when I pass the gate, but I don't stop. There's a girl in a yellow coat learning to jump from blue to blue again. And the courtyard, this ordinary, stubborn, forgiving courtyard, holds.